Hello and welcome to Lucky by Nature. I know in my last video I mentioned I would make a video on the 6 beginner tames you need to have when starting out, but I realized I got a little bit ahead of myself because I first need to go over how to tame, don't I? Silly me. So here we are and let's get started. If you were to ask our players about taming, no doubt most would say knockout and passive. Some might even mention race taming, but really it's much more than that. So let's go over them. First, we're gonna go over knockout taming. Knockout taming is exactly that. You must knock out a creature in order to tame it. You can use many different methods to do it, but some are far more efficient than others. You can use your fists for smaller dinos such as the dodo and dillos, and you can even use your fist on low level medium dinos because typically low level dinos have low torpor tolerance. Just don't go up to a large or medium dangerous dino and start punching it because you will not fare well. Plus, don't forget that it hurts us more than it hurts them when it's using our fists. You can also use a club, a slingshot, and a boomerang is even better than both of those, but it's still not as good as the good old tranquilizer arrow. But before we get into that, you need to know how to make the main ingredient to knock out dinos and keep them asleep. To make narcotic, you need to collect narco berries and grind them with spoiled meat in the mortar and pestle. This is something you must do religiously throughout your arc journey. Make those narcotic every chance you get because you will go through a lot of it once you get started taming. You can technically get everything with a crossbow and trank arrows, but sometimes you will need a little finesse with some of the low health dinos such as the gallimimus. You can also use tranquilizer darts once you are able to craft a long neck rifle, which is unlocked at level 35. The trank dart is perfect for dinos like the gallimimus because it does very little damage in comparison to its torpor application. For instance, it does 26 damage, 156 instant torpor, 65 over time for a total of 221 torpor. But even better than that is the shock tranquilizer dart, which is also used with a long neck rifle, and it deals 26 damage and 312 instant torpor, which is a lot. 130 over 5 seconds for a total of 442, which is exactly double the torpor of the trank dart. This is the best thing that you can use, like I said before, and it will bring down the largest dinos like the giga the fastest. But you do use up some resources, unlike the trank arrow, which is quite cheap to make. And there's also the fact that you have to be level 96 to unlock the shock trank engram. But be advised that you cannot use the long neck rifle underwater, which is where the trank spear bolt comes in. To use the spear bolt, you need to craft a harpoon launcher, which is quite expensive, and the ammo is also more expensive than the rest. And it's not nearly as good as the shock tranquilizer dart. So if you're trying to tame a delicate underwater creature, use the harpoon launcher. Otherwise, I just would use the crossbow and the trank arrow because you can shoot underwater with a crossbow. But the trank spear bolt does 36 damage, 216 instant torpor, and 90 over 5 seconds for a total of 306, which it is better than the regular dart. I personally like to use the trank arrows with a high quality crossbow for 99% of my tames because of how cheap the trank arrows are to make. And the best part about them is that they stack. So for instance, if you shoot a dino with any of the other trank ammo, it is best to wait for the 5 seconds between shots because if you happen to shoot a couple of seconds too fast, you ultimately lose those 2 seconds worth of torpor that you would otherwise receive. But if you shoot as fast as you can with a trank arrow, instead of interrupting the torpor over time, you will actually stack it. I find this to be extremely helpful when I'm dealing with a giga. because their torpor goes down extremely quick. And if you were to get interrupted by another dino, you could lose potentially thousands of torpor points while you deal with the other dino. In contrast, if you pump 100 or 200 trank arrows and then you get interrupted, you can take care of the other dino and then get back to your giga and continue on tranking it, as if nothing had happened. With that said, however, lower health dinos like the Gallimimus, as I mentioned before, cannot handle the barrage of arrows. With them, you need to take your time to allow their health to pick up a point or two before getting hit again. So if you can't seem to get the hang of this with a trank arrow, you might consider using the long neck with trank darts, since it doesn't do as much damage. And lastly, there are some dinos out there that you can tame and use to knock other dinos out, such as the equus, which is the horse, the scorpion, and the frog, to name a few. Now let's talk about traps. Knocking out taming can be fun, but it can also be very dangerous. In most cases, you will have a dino trying to kill you, and then once you have reached a certain torpor threshold, they start trying to get away from you like cowards. And if you don't have the speed to keep up with them, then you may end up losing your potential tame. This is the reason many choose to make traps. There are several different designs you can choose from if this is the route you choose to take. And if you're a beginner, I highly encourage it, until you get bored of it and want to spice up your life, of course. One of the most popular traps are the kind that you set up on the ground and put ramps on one side of them, and just have the dino come up in it and drop into your trap. But it can get expensive depending on the size of your prey. This is another type of trap that is used to trap flying creatures, where you lure them in and then close the door behind them before they can get out. And it's quite simple to make. Once you have them trapped, you can begin to shoot them with your tranks, from a safe distance of course, but still keep vigilant because something may come up behind you and give you a hard time. So you have them knocked out, now what? Well, once you knock out your dino, they will look nice and harmless, sleeping like a little baby. But do not let it wake up prematurely, because if it does, you will have to start the process all over again with depleted ammo, and that is if it doesn't kill you first. So the way we keep the dino from waking up is we put torpor-inducing resources such as the narcoberries or acerbic mushrooms, narcotics, and biotoxin into the dino's inventory, and then we force feed it to them the same way you eat from your inventory, and we just have to make sure that the purple meter is not completely depleted. Here is some important information that is worth noting. 5 narcoberries with 1 spoiled meat equals 1 narcotic. However, if you were to feed 5 narcoberries to a dino, that will equal to 37.5 torpor over 15 seconds. So 1 narcotic equals 40 torpor over 8 seconds. And then you have the biotoxin, which equals 80 torpor over 16 seconds, which essentially it's the same, because if you were to half it, then it'd be 40 over 8 seconds. But you will understand here in a sec. So for instance, if we wanted to put a full stack of a narcotic into a dino, that would give you 4,000 worth of torpor. And that's over 800 seconds, which equals to 13 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, if you were to put the same amount of torpor, which is 4,000, but you're going to be using biotoxin, all you actually need is half of the 100 narcotics. So you would just need 50 biotoxin, and it would equal exactly the same. It does 4,000 torpor over 800 seconds, or 13 minutes 20 seconds. But when it goes to the narcoberries, you would need a whopping 534 narcoberries to provide the same amount of torpor, 4,000. But where the difference is that it would take over 1,600 seconds, that's over 26 minutes, guys, to actually put all that torpor into the dino. So essentially, if you're dealing with a dino that goes through torpor really, really fast, such as the giga, it would be better to use narcoberries to carry around 534 narco berries, that would use up 53.4 pounds of your total weight, which that's a lot. And of course, to be able to push the same amount of torpor with narcotics, you're only using up 10 pounds. And then with biotoxin, it's even less because you only need 50, which is a total of 5 pounds. The other drawback is that biotoxin and narco berries spoil, but narcotics do not. But the biotoxin, it takes 45 minutes for one to expire from the stack, while narco berries, one expires every 2 minutes. So by the time that one biotoxin expires, you would end up losing almost a quarter of all your narco berries, which that is ridiculous. Which is why most people prefer to carry around the narcotics. This information is important because with this you can figure out how long it will take for your torpor to deplete completely. And if you know how long it's going to take for your dino to tame, then you will have an idea as to how much torpor you need to put into it. A real good resource to help you out with this is the Dodo Dex, which tells you how long it will take to tame a dino and how many torpor inducing resources you will need to put into the dino depending on its level. Now let's talk about passive taming, which in my opinion can be one of the hardest depending on the dinos. Passive taming is basically a type of taming where you don't have to knock out a dino to tame it. So you could call it non-violent, at least for the dino you're trying to tame. There are several different types of passive taming, however. One type of passive taming, which pertains to most dinos, is where you put the dino's favorite food or kibble on the last slot of your quick bar. You go up to the dino and press the button you used to harvest berries with once you are close enough, and you are prompted to feed the dino. The Pegomastax is the same, but the only difference is that it has to come to you and steal the food from your last quick bar slot. And a tougher one is the squid, or the Tuso. You have to let it grab your tame while you feed it. The Hesperornis and the otter, you have to bring a dead fish and feed it to them when you get close enough and you get prompted to feed them. A different type of passive taming is where you drop food on the ground and the dino eats it, such as the roll rat and also the Leopleurodon with honey. Then you have the Basilisk and the Titanoboa with fertilized eggs, and the Gacha with structures. With the blood stalkers, you have to have blood packs in the victim's inventory, whether that's you or one of your dinos. This is where things get a little tougher though. Another type is where you have to feed a high level dino to a Trudon, and the Trudon has to kill it and eat it. So that is not so passive for your tame. That's actually very brutal for your tame. And then you have the Hyenodons, which you have to pet without getting them spooked or aggravated. And the last but not least, you have to bring parakeet fish schools to a Megachelon, which is a massive turtle, and have them tickle its butt, which is pretty annoying and it's very time consuming and it's rough to say the least. Now let's talk about turret taming. This is probably one of the most violent ways to tame a dino because you technically have to beat the crap out of them, beat them into submission. The only way to put torpor into some creatures such as the Titanosaur, the rock elemental, the Carcinos, and now the Astrocetus, or whatever the heck you call it, the space whale, is by inflicting torpor onto them with large weapons such as the cannon, the catapult or rocket launcher, and hitting them right on the head. Out of these creatures, the Titanosaur is the only one that insta-tames once you have reached full torpor, and you won't need food to tame it. Now let's move on to race-only taming. This is where you steal a fertilized egg, hatch it, and raise the babies. The hardest thing about this is trying to steal the eggs because the eggs are usually really hard to get to, except for the Deinonychus eggs. But as for the wyvern, the rock drake, and the magmasaur, It is hard because you usually have to traverse dangerous grounds like cave or trench. Then there is the Reaper King, which you have to raise, but you have to get pregnant and carry it to term. And once it's born, you have to raise it, which could be a very terrifying ordeal, but oh so worth it. Fish basket taming method is pretty self-explanatory. You basically build a fish basket, you submerge it into the water close to the fish you're trying to get, wait for the fish to get into the basket, and boom, you have yourself a nice tamed fish. But of course, I'm talking about the smaller fish, nothing you can ride, such as the koel, I think that's how you call it, the piranha, saber-tooth, salmon, the trilobite, and you can also tame the leech and the lamprey. Now moving on to the craft only taming. 3 creatures can be crafted. You have to acquire the blueprints if you want one of these creatures higher than level 1 or 51 in the case of the mech. You can craft them in a city terminal, on Extinction, or a tech replicator. And lastly, there is Titan taming. In the Extinction map, you will need to tame the 3 Titans in order to defeat the King Titan. The way you tame the Titans is by summoning them, and once they appear, you need to destroy their corruption nodes on their bodies in a design sequence. Please note that the Titans along with the Titanosaur are temporary tames, and they will die eventually. Starve taming is where you knock out a tame but don't put any kibble in their inventory. You let the food bar deplete until it gets low enough to where the dino will eat all required food non-stop, where normally the dino eats when it loses a specific amount of food points depending on the food it has in its inventory. So for example, if a level 100 Rex takes 41 minutes to eat 12 kibble to get tamed, then that means that approximately every 3.5 minutes or so the Rex will eat 1 kibble. When you are starve taming, you essentially don't put any kibble in its inventory and wait for the 41 minutes, and when you put the 12 kibble in the Rex, it will eat non-stop and it will get tamed. While both ways take about the same amount of time, there is a huge advantage by starve taming that you don't have otherwise. And that is that you get to save your kibble if your dino takes accidental damage due to some goofball dino playing tag or from an attack, thereby lowering its tame effectiveness. If that happens, all you need to do is allow it to wake up and start the process all over again as long as its health can take it, or just keep it trapped and try taming it again once it's healed. Losing valuable kibble could be a devastating experience, especially if the eggs are hard to come by. Speaking of taming effectiveness determines the number of bonus levels that a creature will gain when the taming process is completed, and in my opinion, this is the reason why taming effectiveness is super important. This is not much of a big deal when you are first starting to tame dinos because you're just looking for a little help, whether it's surviving or collecting resources. But when it comes to endgame dinos that you will be using to beat the game, you will want to find dinos with the highest possible levels and get the max bonus levels, as this gives you the best chance of getting high stats where you need them, such as high health and high melee. So what type of food should you use to tame dinos? Well, I've mentioned kibble, but you won't have this readily available at the beginning. So for most carnivores, I suggest using raw mutton, which you can get from the little sheep running around, aka ovis. But if you can't find any of them, then the next best thing is raw prime meat, which you can get from most larger dinos. As a beginner, I suggest you go after stegos since they are slow and they do provide a few pieces. But if you're feeling crazy, you can go after an alpha, which gives you nothing but raw prime meat. As for most herbivores, you can just use veggies, but if you don't have any veggies, then the next best thing is mejoberries. But that does take forever to tame them, especially if you're taming a high level dino, which is why I don't suggest you do that. Just concentrate on the mid-level ones. So what taming type do you find easiest? Also, is there anything I missed? Please let me know in the comments. And if you found this video informative, please consider liking and subscribing so you won't miss any of my upcoming noob to pro videos that I will put every Wednesday and Sunday. Thank you for your time and see you next time.